Hi everyone, Archmagos Fariston here. Welcome back to another Malazan Book of the Fallen lore video. In today's video I'm going to cover the lore and history behind the major non-human races of the Malazan world. I know the Malazan books can be daunting, there's so many different groups and races, and for a newcomer to this series it can be totally overwhelming. So I thought I'd do a video explaining the major non-human races. Just as a warning, I want to give you all a big spoiler alert. I'll try not to reveal too much of the story, but if you don't want to know some of the important details, then just be aware of this. Alright, let's reveal some of the lore and history of these amazing races and nations. The Kachin were a reptilian race and one of the founding intelligent races in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. Although evidence of their strange mechanisms, architecture, and their cities could be found on nearly every continent, they were presumed extinct in the days of the Malazan Empire. Their power was said to have been so immense that they kept the elder gods away from the Malazan world until their civilization finally self-destructed. They were also said to have once ruled over the Jaghut race when it was young, in much the same manner as the Juggled Tyrants later ruled over the Imas. The Kachin physiology was that of a large intelligent lizard, standing almost twice as tall as a man. They moved bipedally by balancing the weight of their body with a tapering tail, and they had pale, scaly skin similar to a snake. The warriors had blades instead of hands, so imagine giant velociraptors with blades for hands. Welcome to the deadly world of the Malazans. The Kachin selectively bred their own kind to take advantage of specific traits, in particular the length of the tail. There were the original long tails, the Kachin Chimal, and the engineered short tails, the Kachin Naruk. The Kachin Chimal developed a culture of technological and magical sophistication hundreds of thousands of years before the evolution of humanoids. Not much is known about this ancient race, and what little we do know is mainly derived from their ruins and artifacts, such as skykeeps like Moon Spawn. However, it was known that their society was hierarchical, in a similar manner to ants, with a single female queen, the matron, and thousands of male drones and soldiers. The Kachin Chimal seemed to lack a racial warren to draw upon. Instead, they used gravity-based magic that mixed heavily with their technology. They lived in gigantic structures known as skykeeps, essentially flying cities so large they appeared to be flying mountains. Most skykeeps were destroyed during the civil war that exterminated their race. However, there were a few skykeeps known to remain during the time of the Malazans. Some examples include Moon Spawn, used by the Tiste Andii, and another one was sighted on the continent of Lether. The elder warren of the Kachin Chimal was called Kachin. Kachin sorcery is born of sounds our ears cannot hear, formed into words that loosen the bindings that hold all matter together, that hold it to the ground, sounds that bend and stretch light as a tidal inflow up a river is drawn apart at the moment of turning. With this sorcery they fashioned fortresses of stone that rode the sky like clouds. Fear Sengar. Kachin Chimal architecture used vast plazas covering thousands of square miles. These plazas were lined by flagstones that fitted together perfectly and seemed to be immune to age and weathering. One such plaza was known to remain on Stratham. The stone used in Kachin Chimal construction was nearly unbreakable, even millennia later. In the time of the Malazan Empire, the Kachin Chimal have more or less died out, although they do appear in the 10th book, The Crippled God, but I won't get into any more details and give away the story. Death shall be my bridge, Toblakai saying. The Thelomen Toblakai were an intelligent humanoid race. They were said to be descended from the Thelomen and to be the blessed of the children of the Great Mother. The Thelomen Toblakai were humanoid, though taller and generally more physically robust than humans, with broad flat faces. Pure-blooded Toblakai stood at over 7 feet tall and were extremely muscular. They were capable of interbreeding with humans to produce viable half-breeds, but they seem to have a different evolutionary descent, given by the fact that they have 4 lungs rather than 2. It was known that certain Thelomen Toblakai could essentially become their own warrens. The exact circumstances that surrounded this phenomenon were unknown. However, Karsa Orlong appeared to be one such example, channeling his warren into the ability to ignore the structure and effects of spells. Even elder magic, such as Telan of the Telan Imus. However, Karsa Orlong and his tribe's immunity to magic might also have come from the use of blood oil, a substance related to Ottataral. The Thelomen were a people who fell into barbarism. They once possessed high civilization, cities and books. However, most of them now lived in tribes and eked out a primitive existence, breeding horses and feuding with nearby tribes. There were several races which were categorized as Toblakai, including the Barghast, who are offspring of mortal Imas and Thelomen Toblakai, the Fen, the Tarthanal, the Teblor, Thelomen of course, Thul Alai, and the Trell. One of the best known Thelomen was Karsa Orlong, and his race still lives on in the days of the Malazan Empire. The Jaghut were a non-human elder race and one of the 4 founding intelligent races of the Malazan world. The Jaghut were known to humans mostly in legend. The term Jaghut had largely degenerated in human use to Jag, and Doran Rav comments that he has heard Jaghut being referred to as Jag in many stories. The Jaghut were solitary, powerful beings who once dominated much of the world after the Kachin Chimal disappeared. The younger Jaghut race was said to have once been ruled over by the Kachin Chimal, much as the Juggled Tyrants later went on to rule over the Emas. Mammoth informed his nephew Crocus Younghan that 3 races had struggled for dominion in the early days of the world. The first to disappear were the Forkrul Assail. The other 2 races were the Jaghut and the Telan Emas, who warred for centuries. The Jaghut ultimately failed because they were a race of individuals who fought each other, as much as their other racial enemies. The Jaghut were taller and broader than humans, and they had tusked lower jaws. Their skin was grey-green, and their hair was generally grey. Their fingers were longer and possessed more joints than a human finger. As mentioned in the book The Bone Hunters, the Jaghut possessed 2 hearts and possibly duplicates of other organs, in a similar manner to the Thelomen Toblakai. The Jaghut were extremely long-lived. Essentially, they were immortal, and they would not die except through violence or if they had an accident. And they were capable of interbreeding with humans and also with Thelomen Toblakai. Whether the offspring were viable is unknown. They were adapted to living in a cold climate, and they generally preferred an Arctic environment. If we look at their magic, the Jaghut primarily used the warren of Umtos Falak, an elder racial warren that allowed them to control vast areas and was generally tuned towards the magics of ice, cold, stasis, and preservation. The warren could also produce effects like stagnation, isolating whole continents from the rest of the world. In one case, this prevented the magic of the continent of Lether from evolving for over 300,000 years. The Jaghut were solitary and did not create communities. They saw community as a concept as leading to power over others, leading to dominance, hunger for power, slavery, and ultimately a downward spiral into tyranny over all other living things. Instead, they preferred to live alone, or at the most only with their closest family. Despite this tendency towards isolation, the parental instincts were very strong, which resulted in a scaling up of conflicts with the Telan Imas. For example, if a parent was attacked, their spouse and their children would come to fight with them, and vice versa. This could result in massive devastation due to the scale of sorcery involved. There is, however, one exception to this rule of isolation, and this is the Juggled Tyrants. These are Jaghut for whom conquest and rule was a constant hunger. These individuals would use their powerful magical capabilities to enslave and dominate other races. In the book The Toll of the Hounds, it was hinted that Jaghut used to have a great civilization, but the reasons for their fall into barbarity, or at least a primitive style of life, and why the Jaghut lived in solitude were voluntary, after they discovered the ills of civilization. As a result of the tyrant Barghast's actions, the Imas underwent the ritual of Telan and became undead, and were henceforth known as the Telan Imas. In the battles between the Telan Imas and the Jaghut, no quarter was given. If any trace of the Jaghut was found by the Imas, a pogrom was raised in which several clans converged on the site until all of the Jaghut were slain or the Telan Imas army was wiped out. Thanks to the Telan Imas, the world of the Malazans is largely free from Jaghut, although some Jaghut are rumoured to still survive into the present age. The next race or group of races I would like to talk about are the Tiste. The firstborn, or the Tiste Andii, claim that their goddess, Mother Dark, gave birth to them in a time before light, and that they are Mother Dark's first children, but others believe that the elder gods have a better claim to this title. 3 of these early Tiste Andii have special prominence, named as the sons of Mother Dark herself: Anamander Rake, Andarist, and Silchus Ruin. These 3 have a special place in the history of the Andii. The Tiste Andii are a tall, black-skinned people, usually with white hair and multicolored eyes. They are practically immortal and only die in combat or from accidents. Given that I've already done a video completely dedicated to the Tiste Andii, I will move on to the other races, but feel free to go check it out. The Tiste Liosan. The Tiste Liosan were a non-human elder race, also known as the Children of Light. They were the second of Mother Dark's children. They were not one of the 4 founding races, and they only had contact with the Malazan world due to a breach in the barriers surrounding their warren of Kurald Thurlan, possibly through the human use of Telos and of Thur, the paths of fire and light, and the Imas use of the Telan, the hold of fire. The Tiste Liosan were taller than humans, though of similar proportions. Their features were similar to those of a Tiste Edur, apart from their white, almost luminous skin and the silver colour of their slanted, epicanthic, almond-shaped eyes. Their hair was silver or gold and generally kept long. The Tiste Liosan were close kin to the Tiste Edur and Tiste Andii, though they did not share genetic descent. Their internal anatomy differed from those of humans. Specifically, their heart was known to be buried deeper in the torso. The Tiste Liosan are probably the least well known of the Tiste races, and they had the least contact with the Malazan world. They inhabited Kurald Thurlan, the elder warren of light, and they were not native to the Malazan world. In contrast to their apathetic kin, the Tiste Andii, the Liosan were high-tempered, they were arrogant, and also very zealous. Dedicated warrior priests called seneschals acted as a bridge to their god of light, Osric, also called Osric. Although they recognised that the Tiste Andii were the first of Mother Dark's children, they viewed their cousins as enemies and in fact vermin, tainted by the lack of Father Light's purifying blood. As such, they deserved only death. Only among the Liosan, children of Father Light, was the Tiste blood pure. The Tiste Edur were tolerated as their blood contained something of the Father, but they were viewed as a lesser species of Tiste. Socially, the Liosan appeared to be martially organized and hierarchical, led by their warrior priests. The Liosan's armor was white enamel. They wielded light, narrow-bladed ivory longswords, scabbarded in pale wood, as well as curved scimitars that appeared to be carved from ivory. They rode white, long-limbed horses with rust-coloured manes. The Liosans were religious, and they considered the text of their god Osric's visions to be sacred, and they often consulted it for wisdom. Osric is an ascendant, known as the Lord of the Sky. He is also known as Osric, Liosarkal, and the Brother Light. He is champion of High House Light. He is a soul-taken and god of the Tiste Liosan. His soul-taken form is that of the Elaint, which possess glittering scales of silver and gold, and rivaled Animander Rake and Orphantal in size. He is the son of Father Light and an unknown mother. Osric is tall, pale-skinned. He has wavy, silver-long hair, which was streaked with gold, the appearance of a pure Liosan. His eyes were silver with gold flecks. When standing alongside Amanas, Cotillon, and the Traveller, Osric appeared tall, with blunt features and gold eyes. His lips were heavy, and his smile revealed prominent tusks at his lower jaw. Osric explained his godhood in the following passage. The Liosan worship themselves. I happen to be a convenient figurehead. Now, the Liosans are said to still exist, but they interact very rarely with the Malazan world. And this brings us to our third and final Tiste race, the Tiste Edur. The Tiste Edur are a non-human elder race, also known as the Children of Shadow. They were the third of Mother Dark's offspring. Little was known of the early history of the Edur, but we do know that they were originally from Kurald Emurlan. When their warren was shattered, a group of Edur left Tiste lands led by Skabandari Bloodeye, alongside a group of Tiste Andii led by Silchus Ruin. They eventually arrived at the continent later known as Lether. After fighting a brutal war with the Kachin Chamal, the Tiste Edur subsequently betrayed their Andii allies and settled in the northwest of the Lether continent. The Edur are a profoundly long-lived people. Some live over 100,000 years, whose culture was both resilient and conservative. Some say, however, that it was too conservative, that they preferred to dream of past glories of a long-ago golden age rather than move forward. The Edur have grey skin with brown hair and angular eyes. They have a similar height like the other Tiste races, but they are said to be more brutal and less refined. The Edur population of northern Lether wear clothing that is barbaric in appearance, made of animal hides and decorated with fetishes, claws, bones, and seashells. Tiste Edur history is shrouded in myths and falsehoods. Little that the Edur themselves know of their own history is truth. It's been twisted by the Edur themselves to cast themselves in a better light. What is known, however, was that their warren Kurald Emurlan had been shattered and its fragments taken by false kings and gods. After the shattering, the Edur invaded the Malazan world under the command of Skabandari Bloodeye, along with an army of Tiste Andii under the command of Silchus Ruin, fleeing the sundering of Kurald Emurlan and the wars among the Tiste which plagued Kurald Galain. Upon arriving in the Malazan world, they warred with the Kachin for dominance on the Lether continent. They managed to annihilate the Kachin, but at a great cost. Of the initial 400,000 Tiste Andii, only 1,000 survived, and of the 200,000 Tiste Edur, only 18,000 survived. The losses of the Andii were in large part due to the treacherous actions of Skabandari Bloodeye, who held back his Tiste Edur warriors to ensure that as many Edur survived as possible, and that as many Tiste Andii were killed as possible. In an act of betrayal, Bloodeye then stabbed and imprisoned Ruin within an Azath house, and the Edur turned upon the remaining Tiste Andii and slew them. This betrayal did not go unanswered. The elder gods of the Malazan realm and the Elaint went to war against Skabandari Bloodeye, whose skull was crushed by Kilmandaros and his soul imprisoned in eternal agony. The Edur were then scattered and reduced to a primitive way of life. Their last bastion is on the northern west part of the continent of Lether in the shadowed forests. The Edur hold to a twisted version of history in which they were the ones who were betrayed, with the Andii having turned upon them, and the elder gods then coming to persecute and scatter them. Other Edur were said to have links with the Moranth of Genebacchus. A number of Edur were drawn to a fragment of Curled Emerlan in the Moranth forest, and were welcomed by the Moranth. Although long since gone, the legacy of these few Tistodora had a significant impact on the Moranth culture. If we look at the magic which the Tiste Edur use, approximately 3/5 of the Edur are able to use sorcery. The shattering of their racial warren, Kurod Emerlan, meant that there were many different fragments to draw upon, and a myriad of flavors to Edur magic. Something in the Edur blood makes them difficult to accurately detect with magical means. A magical observer might determine Edur were present, but would struggle to provide an exact count or position. The Edur have a unique and precious wood which their ancestors brought to the Malazan world from Kurod Emerlan. They use it to construct their homes and ships, they decorate their villages and sacred sites, and they enchant this wood with Kurod Emerlan sorcery in order to cast a perpetual shadow on the surrounding area. The Tiste Edur hold vast numbers of foreign slaves, and slavery is a big part of the Edur culture and economy. Slaves are assigned any number of menial tasks such as harvesting the fields, mending fishing nets, gathering seaweed, preparing food, or serving as the personal handmaid to a noblewoman. Although the Edur thought little of their slaves' lives, their outward conduct is highly regulated. Slaves were rarely beaten for transgressions, and those slaves who committed a terrible crime were always granted a swift death. If we look at the religion, the Edur religion was based on the worship of 4 Tiste soul-taken Elaint, Skabandari Bloodeye, Father Shadow, and his 3 daughters, Menedora, Sukul Ankadu, and Sheltatha Lor. The Edur created sanctified temples in the forest by painting entire groves of trees with blood. They used Kagenza pollen in the blood to keep it from thickening. The colour white was a symbol of evil for them, both for its representation of Menedora and likely for its association with Silchus Ruin. The Tistodora still live in the days of the Malazan Empire and are mainly located on the continent of Lether. The Forkrul Assail, or Forkrul, are a non-human mythical elder race. They use the hold of Archmagos Fariston. The Forkrul Assail are humanoid, although taller and thinner than humans. They possess more joints in their limbs and hands, enabling them to bend their lower arms in all directions. They have a jointed sternum, large, solid black eyes, and blue blood rather than red. The skin is described as white as alabaster. It was said that their bodies were hinged as if they had two sets of hips, and that whilst they could walk on two legs, they could also stand on four. At least some of them have two hearts. They are physically more robust than humans and appear to be virtually unkillable through conventional means, healing from cuts and blows extremely quickly. They also possessed incredible strength, speed and agility, and are able to successfully combat several powerful opponents such as Toblakai and Tiste Edur at once, while sustaining only minor wounds. They fight empty-handed, using their fists like clubs, or using their fingers to punch through armor and bone. Sorcerous attacks simply wash off them like water. In addition, they have preternatural longevity, more so than most of the other races, and they can live for millennia without food or water. When we look at their culture, the Forkrul Assail believed in balance as an absolute principle, and the resolution of disputes through the means of peace. Therefore, they set themselves up as arbiters to deliver such peace upon the other races of the Malazan world. Forkrul Assail seem to lack a collective culture and exist primarily in isolation. Generally, the Assail seem only to gather when they pass judgment and arbitration, when they are requested to do so by other races. The only community depicted with any depth was the Korlantz faction, which had a fairly regimented hierarchical culture with the pures, the pure-blooded, at the top of the hierarchy, then the watered, or the watered down, next in the level of authority, and anyone lower down being essentially slaves in this society. They sometimes fashioned alliances with other races, but only to achieve their goals. In their own communities, names were basically irrelevant. But when they dealt with lesser races, they often adopted titles as names, and their names reflected their obsession with arbitration. They used their voices to command their victims, but when they communicated with each other, they did so telepathically. The Forkrul Assail construct vast underground cities, also called pit cities, that serve as gathering points rather than places to dwell. They wear little clothing, wearing only a harness of leather straps, or even just going naked. The continent referred to as Assail was said to be the most dangerous place on the Malazan world. The Forkrul Assail were one of the founding races in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, thought to have been created by Kilimandaros, which is a Azathani who was worshipped by the Forkrul Assail. One of the greatest of the conflicts the Forkrul were involved in was with the Kachin Shamal. During this conflict, the Assail began to lose, and ultimately turned on their own god, harnessing its power by wounding it. This resulted in their Forkrul destroying all but one nest and matron of the Kachin Shamal. The final matron opened a portal into chaos and blocked it from notice, so that when the Forkrul Assail used their god's power, she could sacrifice herself in order to destroy the god, as it consumed both of their souls. What remained of the Forkrul Assail god came down in the glass desert and lived on as mindless diverse, with no chance of ever assembling again. The Forkrul also fought the so-called Just Wars against the Tiste Liosan, and Silchus Ruin of the Tiste Andii once encountered the Forkrul Assail. Silchus Ruin also revealed that the Forkrul people had at one time formed an alliance with the Jaghut. The Forkrul Assail do survive in the days of the Malazan Empire, but they had not interacted with the Malazans until Tavor Paran and her bone hunters decided to liberate the crippled god. The next race of non-humans are the Barghast. The Barcast are a non-human nomadic warrior society who are found on several continents. Generally larger than humans, they are often seen as exotic barbarians or savages by the humans of the Malazan world. They were divided into many clans, with each hunter group being identified through their tattoos. The tattoos depict the history of their families going back as many as hundreds of generations. Rivalries between clans are fierce, with some clans recognizing others as their blood enemies. Duels to the death between rival clan members are common and even tolerated at clan gatherings. Each clan is led by a war chief and guided by its shamans, known as shouldermen. Shouldermen communicate with the spirits of their dead ancestors through dreams. Spirits provide guidance and patrol the Barghast lands, warning them of trespassers. Barghast shamans can create blood iron to enchant weapons with a power that links the wielder to the weapon. They can imbue protective powers on individuals through the use of bone circles. Individuals are placed inside the circle while the shaman dances around them for days. The Barcast live in tents, teepees and yurts made of wicker and hide, and their clothing is made of natural materials. Every tribe makes use of ash, paint and foul-smelling grease on their skin. Grey ash on the face, for example, is a sign of mourning, and the Bederin grease, when applied to the skin, keeps away biting flies and insects. The Barghast are known for their use of crudely made hook swords, hook knives, and lances. Barghast are sexually free and amorous. They openly proposition those who they're attracted to, and they casually pair off with strangers. They possess a fear, however, and hatred of the Morinth, a circumstance with which twist a certain Morinth blamed on false memories passed down from ancient times. The Barghast live in the days of the Malazan Empire, and some Barghast even fight in the Malazan army, such as Trots, who was a member of the elite unit, the Bridge Burners. The next race on the list are the Moranth, probably my favourite race, or one of my favourite races in the Malazan books. So the Moranth are a highly regimented people who live in the cloud forest of Genabacchus. Their culture is mainly closed off from outsiders who find their way something of a mystery. The Moranth are covered in chitinous, insect-like armour at all times, wearing helmets with only small visor slots for sight. Their armour is difficult to remove and in some cases appears to be sutured on. In the case of Twist, his mangled hand was visible, proof that there was a flesh and blood man inside the armour. In fact, Moranth are so thoroughly encased in their armour that it was difficult to identify their sex. They speak to each other in a language of clicks and buzzes, and on the whole are reticent to communicate with outsiders. The Moranth have domesticated enormous flying insects known as quarrel, which they use as a means of transportation. They're essentially gigantic flying dragonflies. The Moranth live in valleys high above in the mountains of Cloud Forest, where they possess fields of green farms and canals for irrigation. The Moranth had also built several towers in the mountains where they presumably live. Moranth and Barcast were said to be descended from a seafaring Emas culture that interbred with the Toblakai. Within the Moranth, colours denote membership of the different castes or guilds. According to Malazan sources, the different clans don't like to mix, and there is a fierce rivalry amongst them. The Black Moranth are the main infantry. Some of the Black Moranth are resentful of the Gold's refusal to include them in military decision-making. The Blue Moranth are the sailors and traders. The Gold Moranth are the ruling caste and elite infantry. They're resented by the Black Moranth for making military decisions unilaterally. The Green Moranth are basically couriers and a clan used for transportation. The Red Moranth seem to be the diplomats. Torn, a red veteran, was an attaché to the Malazan contingent under Aragan in Darujistan. The silver Moranth are basically the priests, the sages, and the mystics. They're the closest thing that the Moranth have to the Malazan idea of a mage. They were thought to be the creators of Moranth munitions. Speaking about Moranth munitions, it's said that the Moranth munitions are what makes the Malazan saboteur truly effective. The Moranth only traded some type of munitions, as Gano's Parran found out much later when he raided a Moranth munitions warehouse via a warren. Torvald Nom used some otherwise unknown alchemical device which he had received as a token of gratitude for rescuing a Moranth. If we look at the alliance that the Moranth had with the Malazan Empire, in 1156 of Burned Sleep, the Moranth allied themselves with the Malazan Empire. According to Moranth custom, a contract is valid for as long as one of the signatories is still alive. As of events that led to the rise of the Juggled Tyrant in Darujistan in Gardens of the Moon, at least one of the signatories was still alive, and therefore the contract with the Empire still stood. Negotiators of treaties with the Moranth included Aragan, Teishran, and Onos Tulan. It was also recorded that Emperor Kalanved and Cotillon were most likely the only people known to have found the Moranth and sneaked into the cloud forest where they lived. In the 8th year of the Janabacchus campaign, the Free Cities allied themselves with the Crimson Guard and others. In the year 1163 of Burned Sleep, the Empire military was under the impression that Moranth munitions were becoming scarce. When Whiskey Jack mentioned this to a black Moranth, wondering about the generous supply he and his squad had just received, the black replied selectively and told him that assistance for him would never be scarce. By the time of the Panion War in 1164, a schism had occurred amongst the Moranth. This was triggered by a succession of gold Moranth defeats. Afterwards, only the black Moranth remained loyal allies of the Malazan Empire, although the blue did continue to operate the Malazan sea lanes to 7 cities. There was a long-running rivalry between the Moranth and the Free City of Pale over contested trade routes. The two mercantile powers often fought with each other, and more often than not, the City of Pale would win. The Segulais were ancient enemies of the Moranth, going back to when both parties resided in Darujistan. Some say that the Moranth had devised their munitions in order to defeat the martial skill of the Segulais. And lastly, the Tiste Edur were also involved. The ancestors of the Moranth discovered a fragment of the warren of Curald Emorlan in the vast forest of Moranth that later became their homeland and gave them their name. There they discovered a small number of surviving Tiste Edur, just as lost as themselves and weary of war. They decided to make peace, and the Tiste Edur were welcomed into the Moranth community. This union created the permanent rift between the Moranth and the Barghast. While the Tiste Edur have long since disappeared from Moranth forest, they had a significant impact on the Moranth culture. The Trell are a non-human, pastoral, nomadic warrior society. They inhabit an area known as the Masal Plains on the western side of the Jagodan in 7 cities. Trell society strongly values tradition and was originally defined by wandering, warring clans who lived in yurts and herded half-wild Bederin, a form of bison. Their culture changed with the influence of outside settlers and traders. The Trell soon established their own merchant settlements that traded in Bederin, goats and sheep. At least one settlement was home to 15,000 Trell. Not all Trell were ready to accept the change, however, and many youths left their homes for adoptive clans that still followed the old ways. The Trell are organized into clans with clan leaders, but tribal elders also have a place of leadership within Trell society. Command in battle falls to the elders, even when there are more promising candidates among the younger Trell warriors. Trell witches, known as shoulder women, are ancient creatures with the power to conduct divinations from bone and imbue objects with sorcerous power. They also possess a wealth of esoteric historical knowledge long forgotten by other races. Trell warriors achieve a higher status when they become blooded. The Trell fight as individuals in battle, each warrior hoping to claim the often fatal glory of being first to close with the enemy. They attack as a mob and rely on their great size to overwhelm smaller opponents. The attacks are less successful on disciplined troops equipped with spears or pikes. They use a variety of weapons including swords, maces, pikes, recurved longbows, javelins, throwing axes and slings, and the Trell are known to use pole slings to throw bags containing hundreds of black scorpions into enemy formations. Trell live for hundreds of years. Morint, for example, was over 400 years old before he became Icarium's guardian at the behest of the Nameless Ones. The Trell are still alive in the days of the Malazan Empire, and they appear in several books. Alright everyone, that was all of the major races for today's video. No, hang on, aren't we forgetting someone? Just kidding. The Tilan Imas have so much lore and history and play such a pivotal role in the Malazan world that I think they deserve a video just for them, which is an upcoming project. So please like and subscribe, it really helps the channel, and thanks for watching.